I don't know if you're into music, but I mean, even a great album. I mean, if I put on a Paul Simon record, I
Hmm.
can get turned on by the lyrics, and
Yeah.
him singing about New York City is enough to kind of just blow, at least inspire me to want to sit down, because sitting down and writing can be a laborious, awful fucking task. And
Well,
it's
you can, it can be tough to feel like the enjoyment in it.
yeah,
And I think when you feel the enjoyment in it, you usually do it better. At least I know I do. So
yeah, because you had said earlier in the podcast, you find enjoyment out of it. Are you conscious and you're cognizant of the fact of when you're in the writing itself, you're finding joy, or is it when looking back, you're
well,
like,
I often find no joy in it, or
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, yeah.
I will often listen. The times I find the greatest joy is when I've been working on something for a while. That's why I do this, and I'll start to see how it all connects. Like I've said before, like I find my writing process is kind of like, all right, I'm going to sit at my table, and I sit down at the table, and I've got like a big sack. Imagine I've got this big sack next to me, and in that sack are a bunch of like jigsaw puzzle pieces, and I can't see in the sack. So I reach my hand in, go in here, and I'm like, all right, here,
Boom.
okay, this is the piece. This piece has a curve, and I start describing the piece in detail, how it looks, what it feels like. Then, like, that's the piece. I put it on the table. I do another piece, and I'll kind of have an idea of these pieces and maybe what they, but I don't really know. I'm just describing pieces. I'm describing pieces, and sometimes I'll get like 90, 120 pages into something, and I will just have a bunch of goddamn pieces that don't really fit together, and I
Yeah.
will give up on a project, and I've done that before. Um, but then sometimes I'll start to see how they all fit together, and then they'll all like a puzzle, and they'll all start fitting together really quickly. I'm like, oh my god, like oh yeah, like and like I take great joy in that when I
Mhm.
really start seeing, how something fits together. Um, and when that happens, often it's like I'll be like 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the project, and I'll kind of see and then I'll see like all the way to the end. Like it's like I'm standing on the mountain, and I can see like all the way out to the sea, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This is
Well,
great.
that was the question. I asked a lot of people this too. When you start a book or start a new thing, do you know the end?
No,
You
not
never
really.
know the end.
Not really.
So it's just every day is something new. And I'm the same way. Some authors I've talked to, they know the first sentence and the last sentence, and then they just got to fill the shit in between. Um, you don't know at the.
No, I've, no, I very rarely. I'll have a sense of what I think the book is about thematically and
Mm,
how it begins, and maybe generally where I think it's going. But I don't know exactly how it ends. And then usually at some point I will figure out like, oh, this is how it ends.
mhm,
Um, then I start filling in everything in between.
mhm.
So, but again, the figuring out is kind of where I get the most joy.
A lot of drafts.
I mean, there's always lots of drafts. But something I do, I mean, your listeners are interested. So like I will write my first draft, and to really get in the mechanics. So I do about 1,000 words when I'm on a project Monday to Friday. The weekend I read over what I did the week before. I always, at the beginning of each day, I always read what I did the day before.
Mhm.
And then I get to the end of the day, and I never stop when I don't know what's going to happen. So I hit my 1,000 words, but I always know what's going to happen. I usually write the first sentence for the next day, like in all caps, like
Yeah,
that's a
kind of get yourself going. I do the same
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
I've got the next first sentence, and then I've got some bullet proofs. This is what happens at the and usually as the draft gets longer, like my notes at the end, and like are like 10 pages of notes at the end that I'm kind of sifting through to make sure I'm going in the right direction. And then I get to the end of that draft, and I will have been kind of reading over each weekend. Like I read 50 pages back each weekend, each weekend, each weekend. So I'm always reading back, reading it over. Not editing though, in any profound sense.
Mhm.
Uh, I write the whole thing out, and then I get to the end, and I go back, and my second draft is usually I just put up the first draft and I retype the entire first draft.
Oh wow. Why? Why?
It's a way, it's a way of editing, you
Okay.
know. So when you edit and you're editing on a draft that's already written, it's a process of elimination,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's to remove something is actually it's easier to keep something in than to take it out. To take it out, you have to go in there, you have to rechange to pull it out, right? Whereas if I'm retyping the whole thing, it's actually the affirmative act is to include something. I have to physically include something. So I'm like, it
Mhm.
better be good. Because if it's not good, then it's just easier. If I don't have to retype, this is dumb. That's easy for me. So it actually makes it easier to get rid of the
Yeah.
shit that's no
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
If I'm typing, I'm like, this is good enough for me to be re-including into this draft. And
And
I've just
are you trusting your gut as you're doing this?
as my taste, and my taste. It's just my taste in the story, and this is what I think is good. So that's sort of what I've almost now all do with all my books. I retype the entire first draft, saying I've retyped the whole thing as a way of editing, and I'm editing as I go. I'm
uh,
like, oh, that was dumb. What was I thinking? That doesn't sound right. No, that paragraph gone. But whereas if it was like I was just editing, I'm like, well, that paragraph, I'm like, oh, it sounds okay. I'll leave it in. It's easy. Who cares? And I do that, kind of first to second draft, and then I've got, a better draft, and then, I'll go, usually on like my third draft, I'll print the thing out and I will read it out loud with like a pencil,
uh,
again, put in all the changes, and I kind of take it, and then maybe by that point, I'm like showing it to like one or two trusted readers, and they give me their edits. But maybe it's not being a product of MFA programs. I don't circulate my stuff super widely. My wife is one of my early readers, maybe one or two other people, and then I hand it to my agent.
mhm.
Um, Whereas I have friends of mine who are, like very successful writers, and most of them seem to be from it, and they send it out everywhere.
Mhm.
And I'll tell them like, God, I'll say to them like, God, how can you send it out? It doesn't drive you crazy, all this feedback. I mean, and they're like, no, I know who's good at what, and I know what stuff to disregard and what stuff to include. Whereas me, I just, I don't know, I would feel too exposed doing it that way.